Apollo 11 was the most historic and famous spaceflight in human history, marking the first time humans set foot on the surface of the moon. Serving as the culmination of the space race, a geopolitical competition between the United States and the Soviet Union rooted in the Cold War rivalry. Furthermore, Apollo 11 bore the immense responsibility of fulfilling the ambitious goal set for the United States by President John F. Kennedy in 1961.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The historic flight was undertaken by three heroes: Commander Neil Armstrong, Lunar Module pilot Buzz Aldrin, and Command Module pilot Michael Collins. Launched atop a Saturn V rocket from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on July 16, 1969. The Apollo spacecraft consisted of three parts: the Command Module, which housed the three astronauts and was the only part to return to Earth; the Service Module, which provided propulsion, electrical power, oxygen, and water to the Command Module; and the Lunar Module, which was made up of two stages: a descent stage with a large engine and fuel tanks for landing on the moon, and the lighter ascent stage containing the cabin for two astronauts and a small engine to return them to lunar orbit. After a three-day transit, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the surface aboard the lunar module Eagle, landing in the Sea of Tranquility on July 20th, while Michael Collins remained in lunar orbit aboard the Command Module Columbia. Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon approximately 6 hours after landing, followed by Buzz Aldrin 19 minutes later. Together, they spent around 2.5 hours walking on the surface, planting an American flag, speaking by telephone with President Richard Nixon, deploying scientific instruments, and collecting 21.5 kilograms of lunar material. After more than 21 hours on the surface, they rejoined Collins in lunar orbit, and the crew returned safely to Earth on July 24th, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. The legacy of the mission was monumental. Lunar samples returned by the mission led to the identification of 3 previously unrecognized minerals, and scientific instruments deployed on the surface continued returning data for years afterwards. The crew were honored with ticker tape parades, a World Goodwill Tour, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Today, the Command Module Columbia is preserved at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., while the descent stage of Eagle remains forever on the lunar surface. Apollo 12 was the 6th crewed flight in the United States Apollo program and the second to land on the moon. Following the success of Apollo 11, the Apollo 12 mission was pushed back by 2 months, allowing the crew additional time for geology training. This flight was undertaken by 3 astronauts: Commander Charles Pete Conrad, Lunar Module pilot Alan L. Bean, and Command Module pilot Richard F. Gordon. The Apollo 12 spacecraft and launch vehicle were nearly identical to those of Apollo 11, with the only addition being a set of hammocks to provide the astronauts with a more comfortable rest. On November 14, 1969, the spacecraft lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center into the teeth of a severe rainstorm. Moments after clearing the launch pad, a heart-stopping crisis struck. Apollo 12 was hit by lightning twice, throwing the instrumentation into chaos. Fortunately, the quick-thinking crew switched to the auxiliary power supply, restoring the data relay and successfully saving the entire mission. From there, the voyage into lunar orbit proceeded smoothly. On November 19th, Conrad and Bean transferred to the lunar module and made history by executing a pinpoint landing in the ocean of storms, while Gordon continued to orbit above. This touchdown was so remarkably precise that they landed within walking distance of the robotic Surveyor 3 probe, which had been resting there since 1967. This clockwork precision proved that NASA could accurately target future landings right next to sites of high scientific value. The duo spent just over 1 day and 7 hours on the lunar surface. They deployed the nuclear-powered Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package, ALSEP, and brought along the first color television camera to the moon. Unfortunately, the camera's sensor was destroyed when Bean accidentally pointed it directly at the sun. Making up for it, during their second moonwalk, they visited Surveyor 3 and stripped off parts to return to Earth, marking the first and only time humans have retrieved hardware from a previous space mission. With their exploration complete, the astronauts lifted off from the moon on November 20th. They returned to Earth on November 24th with a safe splashdown, leaving behind a massive legacy of pinpoint space landing techniques, paving the way for more complex explorations in the future. Apollo 14 was the eighth crewed mission in the United States Apollo program and the first to land in the lunar highlands. It was the last of the H missions. The mission was originally scheduled for 1970, but was postponed because of the investigation following the failure of Apollo 13 to reach the moon's surface and the need for modifications to the spacecraft as a result. The crew, consisting of Commander Alan Shepard, Command Module pilot Stuart Roosa, and Lunar Module pilot Edgar Mitchell, launched on their 9-day mission on Sunday, January 31, 1971. On February 5, 1971, Shepard and Mitchell accomplished what Apollo 13 had missed, a safe landing in the Fra Mauro Highlands. During their 2 moonwalks, they collected 42.8 kilograms of lunar rocks and deployed several scientific experiments. To the disappointment of some geologists, they didn't quite reach the rim of Cone Crater as originally planned, though they came incredibly close. However, the mission still delivered one of the most viral moments in history when Alan Shepard hit 2 golf balls with a makeshift club he had brought along. While his crewmates were on the surface, astronaut Stuart Roosa remained in orbit. Interestingly, he carried hundreds of tree seeds with him. Upon returning to Earth, they were planted and grew into the famous moon trees. Finally, the 3 astronauts concluded their 9-day mission, splashing down safely in the Pacific Ocean on February 9, 1971. Apollo 15 was the 9th crewed mission in the Apollo program and the 4th moon landing. It was the first J mission, with a longer stay on the moon and a greater focus on science than earlier landings. The Apollo 15 crew included Commander David Scott, Command Module pilot Alfred Worden, and Lunar Module pilot James Irwin. To serve its ambitious scientific goals, the spacecraft carried unprecedented state-of-the-art equipment. Most notably, it featured the first-ever use of the lunar roving vehicle, along with a scientific instrument module bay located in the service module, packed with advanced sensors and cameras. The mission officially lifted off on July 26, 1971. Traversing thousands of miles through the void, the spacecraft complex successfully inserted itself into lunar orbit. Commander David Scott and Lunar Module pilot James Irwin landed near Hadley Rill. Thanks to the lunar roving vehicle, they covered distances far exceeding those of previous missions. The duo conducted 4 extravehicular activities, EVAs, spending 18.5 hours on the surface and collecting 77 kilograms of lunar material. At the same time, pilot Alfred Worden remained in orbit, operating an array of cutting-edge sensors to scan and map the moon. Down on the surface, the mission left behind 2 massive legacies. First was the collection of the Genesis rock, a piece of the moon's primordial crust. Second was a moment that thrilled the scientific world. Commander Scott dropped a hammer and a feather at the exact same time. In the vacuum of space, both hit the ground at the very same moment, perfectly proving Galileo's centuries-old theory of gravity. With the mission complete, the spacecraft fired its engines to head back to Earth. On this journey, Worden etched his name into history by performing humanity's first-ever deep space spacewalk. On August 7th, the capsule splashed down into the ocean. Despite one of their 3 parachutes failing to deploy, all 3 astronauts survived safely. The mission was a resounding success, yet it ended with a shocking plot twist. NASA discovered that the crew had smuggled unauthorized postal covers to the moon and sold them to a stamp dealer for profit. The result? Once hailed as heroes, they were severely reprimanded and were never allowed to fly in space ever again. Apollo 16 was the 10th crewed mission in the United States Apollo space program and the 5th and penultimate to land on the moon. It was the second of Apollo's J missions, with an extended stay on the lunar surface, a focus on science, and the use of the lunar roving vehicle. The landing and exploration were in the Descartes Highlands, a site chosen because some scientists expected it to be an area formed by volcanic action. The mission was crewed by Commander John Young, Lunar Module pilot Charles Duke, and Command Module pilot Ken Mattingly. Launched on April 16, 1972, Apollo 16 experienced a number of minor glitches en route to the moon. But this journey almost ended in disaster. Just as they were preparing to land, the spacecraft's main engine malfunctioned. The world held its breath during 6 agonizing hours. NASA even considered the worst-case scenario, aborting the entire mission to save the crew. Fortunately, the issue was resolved at the very last minute. The landing was given a go, but at a cost. The surface mission had to be cut short by 1 day. Leaving the crisis behind, astronauts John Young and Charles Duke successfully touched down on April 21st. In just under 3 days, they drove the lunar roving vehicle for nearly 27 kilometers and collected 96 kilograms of samples. Most notably, they brought back Big Muley, the largest single moon rock ever collected during the Apollo program. And thanks to these samples, a shocking truth was revealed. The scientists were wrong. There were absolutely no volcanoes there. During this time, pilot Ken Mattingly shouldered a lonely but vital mission. Alone in orbit for 126 hours, he circled the moon 64 times, relentlessly capturing priceless images and scientific data. Shortly after the trio reunited, they deployed a sub-satellite into the void, before setting their sights on Earth. And on that journey home, Mattingly had his own defining moment. He stepped out into deep space, floating in the abyss for a full hour to manually retrieve crucial film canisters from the exterior of the service module. On April 27, 1972, the Apollo 16 capsule splashed down safely into the ocean, bringing the three heroes home and concluding a turbulent, yet spectacularly successful mission. Apollo 17 was the 11th and final crewed mission of NASA's Apollo program, the 6th and most recent time humans have set foot on the moon. Unlike previous flights, Apollo 17 placed a heavy emphasis on scientific research. Mission planners had two primary goals when deciding on the landing site: to retrieve lunar highland material older than the Mare Imbrium region, and to investigate the possibility of relatively recent volcanic activity. Therefore, the Taurus Littrow Valley was selected, a region where formations photographed from orbit were strongly believed to be volcanic in nature. The mission was crewed by Commander Gene Cernan, Lunar Module pilot Harrison Schmitt, and Command Module pilot Ronald Evans. Notably, under immense pressure to send a true scientist to the moon, NASA selected Schmitt to replace Joe Engle, making him the first and only professional geologist to ever set foot there. Because all three members had served as backups for previous missions, they were intimately familiar with the Apollo spacecraft systems, allowing them more time to focus on intense geological training. On December 7, 1972, overcoming the only hardware-related launch delay in Apollo history, the Apollo 17 spacecraft officially lifted off. The mission carried several new scientific experiments, including a biological experiment involving 5 mice housed inside the command module. Upon arrival, pilot Ronald Evans remained in lunar orbit to take photographs and conduct scientific measurements, while Cernan and Schmitt detached the lunar module to descend to the surface. As a J-type mission with expanded scientific capabilities, Cernan and Schmitt spent 3 days operating in the Taurus Littrow Valley alongside the third lunar roving vehicle. They completed 3 moonwalks, deployed numerous scientific instruments, and discovered a unique layer of orange soil at Shorty Crater, later proven to be remnants of ancient volcanic activity. This expedition shattered a series of spaceflight records. Longest crewed lunar landing mission, 12 days, 14 hours. Longest time on the lunar surface, 75 hours. Greatest distance traveled during an extravehicular activity, 7.6 kilometers. Longest total duration of lunar surface extravehicular activities, 22 hours, 4 minutes. Largest lunar sample return, approximately 115 kilograms. Meanwhile, Ronald Evans also set the record for the longest time in lunar orbit, 6 days, 4 hours, with a total of 75 orbits. On December 19, 1972, the spacecraft carrying its 3 heroes safely splashed down into the Pacific Ocean, marking the official end of the most ambitious space exploration program in human history. If you'd like to see more video like this, make sure to subscribe, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.